For centuries, women were excluded from political spaces, silenced in decisions that shaped their lives and communities. But their silence was not acceptance. It was resilience waiting to erupt. Across the world, women gathered courage and solidarity, raising their voices in protests for the right to vote, for equal representation, and for basic recognition as equals in society. These movements were not just about ballots. They were about dignity and opportunity. Women marched, chanted, and endured unimaginable resistance, yet they stood firm. Their fight for suffrage was a pivotal step, but it wasn't the end. It laid the foundation for battles yet to come. As time moved forward, so did the fight. Women demanded more than symbolic victories. They sought real change: equal pay, workplace rights, freedom from discrimination, and the breaking of glass ceilings. Their movements grew larger, louder, and more diverse. From rural villages to bustling cities, women united to challenge the systems that held them back, proving that inclusivity is essential for true democracy. Today, we see the fruits of their labor in the faces of women leaders who have redefined power. Icons like Indira Gandhi, known for her resilient and visionary leadership, and Sushma Swaraj, celebrated for her eloquence and compassion, have carved their place in history. Similarly, Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, with her dedicated and transformative efforts, and Aung San Suu Kyi, recognized for her tenacity despite controversies, have shaped the global political narrative. Kamala Harris's trailblazing and charismatic presence and Giorgia Meloni's dynamic and bold leadership continue to inspire generations. Leading nations, shaping policies, and paving the way for future leaders, these women remind us how far we've come. Yet even now, the journey is incomplete. Representation remains uneven, and the barriers, though smaller, still exist. The fight for gender equality in politics is not just about achieving milestones. It's about ensuring every voice is heard, every perspective is valued, and no one is left behind.
So hello everyone, myself Piyush, and this is our fourth podcast among various conversations built on politics, culture and society. And I'm extremely happy to bring this fourth episode where we hope to build conversation on gender and politics. I'm also extremely delighted to announce that today we have Dr. Nupur Ray ma'am as our guest speaker. She is an associate professor and gender scholar from Kamala Nehru College, University of Delhi, with a strong background of academic and journalistic writing. She has published various journals and papers among reputable publications. So, Dr. Ray, we are delighted to have you here today.
Thank you, Piyush, for having me here. I'm also grateful to Bhagat Singh College for initiating these series of conversations, because I think some of those conversations are very meaningful, and they kind of help us to reflect on some of the issues that perhaps are not so explicit in our daily conversations and daily interactions. So I'm glad to be here.
So, ma'am, before we proceed further in discourse of gender and politics, I would like to ask, what does it mean by gender and politics?
Yeah, this is a good question to start with. I mean, when we are looking at gender and politics, there are various dimensions to look at it. One, perhaps a limited view to understand is how are the ways in which gender intersect, interact, and impact each other. So the moment we say gender in politics, we are perhaps looking more in the sense of political landscapes, and there the issue of exclusion and inclusion, the idea of political representation of women, the idea of also how are women accessing politics. So not just women as members of parliament and state legislatures, but also women as voters, women as participating perhaps in some forms of resistance in being able to assert their agency. So that is one. But then the other way to understand politics is also where the third element, which is almost kind of wrapped in gender and politics, is power. Yeah. So then to see this interaction within a matrix of power hierarchies that we are here, right? So when we do speak about the role of women, in politics, we also want to see who is that woman, and how is she located, and where is she located. So the complex interplay of power hierarchies based on different identities of caste, class, religion, ethnicity, they impact. And that is the other way in which it is very important when we are looking at gender and politics in the context of those power hierarchies and social identities. The third way is a broader way, which is that when we move out of looking at politics just in political landscapes, and we are looking at the politics of economy, the politics of information, politics of literature, politics of culture, right? And therefore, to kind of widen and broaden our horizons, to see what is happening, say, in the space of education, say, in the space of media, say, in the space of economy, and then to see that how are those forces within that of power and of other kind of structural and institutional barriers impacting genders. Now, when we say gender, we are very mindful that we are not just looking at women, but we are trying to understand the impact and the interplay of all the genders. Lastly, I would still say, which is a very important, sorry for that long answer, is to also understand that it is also the way, voices of resistance and agency play out within gender politics also impact, the idea of politics and policy making. So therefore, we are looking at gendered mainstreaming within politics, gendered budgeting, gendered notions of educational, norms that we want to create. So that is the other thing which is important when we look at these intersections as to how through everyday voices of our resistance, through everyday voices of agency, through different ways in which women negotiate and pushing the boundaries, also continue to impact the way we are accessing politics and we are understanding politics today.
Okay, thank you for such initial remarks. Ma'am, since we are talking about gender and politics, how do you think that women's leadership style differ from men's? And what impact does it have on policy making?
I think we should begin with kind of refraining from stereotyping, in terms of understanding leadership, because then we will perhaps fall in the same trap of essentializing what is to be a masculine leadership and feminine leadership. But having said that, there is enough research that has been done to look at, and something which is on the lines of Carol Gilligan in a different voice, is to be able to understand that whether it is through women's reproductive roles, whether it is through socialization, women do tend to develop a distinct moral agency. Okay. And that is an important dimension when we look at their contribution and the way they exercise leadership. So for example, if I can simply give you, there are three ways in which there has been found, there has been some kind of difference that one can see. Women as leaders are seen to be more in terms of bringing or building a consensus, okay, right? They also, when they approach their workplace, they approach more in a relational way, whereas men are seen to operate more in an autonomous, objective way. The other thing, which is perhaps one of the problematic areas where women have been always seen as very emotional and therefore perhaps not capable of decision making, and men perhaps being able to take a decision very objectively, is also being seen in a negative light now. Why? Because the ability to empathize and the ability to connect, the ability to include everyone in a conversation is something which, for whatever reasons, women are seen as perhaps more intuitively more drawn towards that. So again, a lot of studies where women scholars are looking at peace studies, more and more engagement there. I'm also reminded of Gandhi. There's a paper that we had written which talks about Gandhi feminizing the social movement. Okay. And one of the first things he feminized was feminizing the personal. Right? So the idea of an assertive body language and the idea of coming across as someone who is very goal-oriented. Women are also very goal-oriented. But then how do we achieve the goal? And do our goals always justify the means? So I think in that space, the idea of collaboration, the idea of consensus building, the idea of empathizing. Women are also seen as long-term transformational practices. Men are perhaps more prone to transactional kind of interaction. We can go on, but I think those are some of the areas which I think are important without perhaps trying to, essentialize too much around the leadership styles.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. I also agree on many statements of yours. So, ma'am, recently Parliament has passed a law and a reservation law specifically, where state legislature and Parliament give reservation to women. So, ma'am, this law will gonna be successful, or it will gonna same as we have seen in village panchayats?
See, Piyush, in social sciences, there are no like a yes or a no. But if I still have to give a yes, it will be an affirmative yes that the passing of the Women's Reservation Bill was pertinent. And it was a very significant landmark step if we are looking at gender equality. When it comes to the idea of affirmative action for women and looking at reservations, there are three very strong arguments in favor. One is the question of justice itself, right? I mean, women constitute about 49% of, the population in terms of, so how can we perhaps imagine a notion of inclusive citizenship without having women equally participating in politics, right? And then the idea of the whole notion of that we need to go beyond what you call as formal equality and move towards an idea of substantive equality, right? So it is not enough to say that right to vote hai, go and cast it. It is not enough to say that. It is important to engage them in some notion of their own awareness. And and for that reason, this is an important step. The other thing which comes in what Anne Phillips talks about, the contrast between the politics of ideas and politics of presence. So, and something that Sarah Harding speaks about in terms of the feminist standpoint theory. So it is important that there is absolutely no scientific evidence that only women can represent women's interests, but it is important for the sake of feminist autonomy and feminist standpoint subjectivities that women are allowed to evolve and enhance their ability to voice their own interest. And for that, the politics of presence is something which is important. So therefore, I'm not sure if village panchayat's story or the reservation there I think most of the studies have given us positive results. And I do understand your concern about in terms of what is the nature of that representation, right? Is it tokenism? It is symbolic. So we understand that. We have Nupur Ray and, and many scholars, V. Geeta and Shireen Rai, who have, kind of engaged on this. But then Mary John. But their argument is to go further ahead within that, to see with the glance of intersectionality that all groups, women from all marginalized communities get represented rather than, kind of taking a step back. So I think it is a welcome step. And but yes, we need to broaden our canvas in not just in terms of seeing them as contesting, but also and being in parliament, but also yes, I mean, what is the stand of individual political parties there? How do women again access politics? How aware are they of the issues? So I think those are also important ideas when we are looking at the idea of women's reservation.
Thank you, ma'am. We are also studying equality in this semester, and this is very important aspect if you are mentioning equality. Yes. So thank you, ma'am. My next question would be, we have recently seen Kolkata rape case and Ujjain rape case, and since you have done scholarly work on women's rights, so how do you analyze the current status of women's rights in current time and India, and specifically talking about Indian government, under Indian government?
See, Piyush, I think to begin with, and India in today's time has a robust legal framework, right? If you look at the rights discourse on women in India, you look at how we have progressed, from from say independence time, and in number of rights and legislations. Also, some of the recent Supreme Court judgments. Well, there are no comparisons, but say in a country like US, when women's abortion rights have actually, there has been an attack on those rights. In India, there's a Supreme Court judgment which acknowledges the reproductive autonomy of a woman beyond her marital status. So, in terms of legal framework, I think we have progressed in terms of rights and policies. However, what is it that is missing is what we need to understand, right? And certainly, when we are looking at the recent case here, and I always, whenever I begin my class, my gender class with my students, I always tell them that why can't we refer to an older case? Why is it that every semester I meet you and I need to begin with a new case, a fresh case? And therefore, the whole point of the whole idea of reiterating that those gaps are very, very important. So therefore, there is a framework which Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum give, which is of the capabilities and functionings. So they say that the gaps that exist actually between rights and empowerment are the capabilities, right? So there are rights and there are legal, discourses. Again, what are the gaps? What are those barriers, those obstacles because of which women are not able to access them? Those gaps need to be filled. There is a work which Professor Bijay Lakshmi Nanda and we have done together, and we propose what we call as reflective autonomy of women. One of the ways perhaps these gaps could be filled. Sorry, it is a theoretical framework, but then we thought perhaps if that could be one of the ways which we can propose. The first component looks at engagement. So it is extremely important that laws should not be made in a vacuum. Laws engage women, and the making of the laws also engage women's participation. So the women's movement in India continuously engages with the state in terms of what are those laws which are required, sexual harassment at workplace or domestic violence. Secondly is the idea of empathy. So yes, we go back to empathy where we do not see empathy in any form of sympathy. So for example, when we look at women, a lot of times the notion of looking at women as victims, as liabilities, as at beneficiaries, those are terms which we need to refrain from, and we need to see women as strong agents, right? So therefore, the notion around when we look at a sexual offense, we need to deconstruct the ideas of shame and honor or purity and impurity, and we need to reframe the violence in the framework of rights, in the framework of basic equality. So, and the second component is emancipation, right? Which is, of course, that the whole notion about informed choice and empowered choice that women are able to make. So, when we particularly look at this case, it alerts us that are we able to recognize what are the visible and what are the invisible forms of violence, right? In feminist theory, it is seen as a spectrum, right? So it is important to kind of go deeper and analyze and see that what are those invisible forms of violence which perhaps get aggravated in these forms. And that is why a deeper intervention is required. Which engaging with women, creating awareness, entering into a dialogue, and then perhaps, I guess those are some of the ways in which the gaps would be, fulfilled.
Thank you, ma'am. Also, we have seen that after Indira Gandhi, we haven't seen any female prime minister in India. So how can we encourage young people to participate in politics, especially the women?
You're right, because I think there are these terms which for some reason carry a negative connotation around them, and one of them happens to be politics, right?
Sure.
So, in fact, I tell my students that the whole idea that I am not interested in politics does not put you in a certain vacuum of not getting impacted by politics, right? So I'm interested in cinema, but I'm not interested in politics doesn't make sense, because cinema is also politics, right?
True.
So it is always important to have an opinion and engagement, right? So one of the things which I do feel, and I think perhaps what you are doing here is certainly one of the ways where we draw attention of students. I mean, what can we say about you? You are surrounded by what you call as a post-truth, post-information kind of discourse. We don't know really what is an authentic source of truth or information. But having said that, when institutions take an initiative like that, where you draw the attention of students to these important issues, then I believe that students begin to reflect. The other, and then perhaps engage further. The other way is always, perhaps, in some way get connected with any of the programs which is being done by the government, right? And that helps to form the linkage. Suppose there are election times, and the whole idea that perhaps students are not as interested. So it is good to connect them, to make them aware that, okay, these are the programs, these are the ways. How do you think? What do you think about it? What do you feel about it? So I do feel that, in colleges, activities like that, debates, discussions, discourses, these are perhaps the ways, and especially breaking myths around gender stereotyping within politics. I think that is another step which will give confidence to women, young students, to participate and to have a voice.
So thank you, ma'am, for sharing your insights and expertise with us. As a political science student, as a man, I learned a lot, and I hope our viewers also learned a lot from today's podcast. So that's all from today's episode.